Spring 1519, a manor house in the French countryside. In a borrowed bed, far from the country of his birth, an old man is dying. And he is doing the one thing no one in the room expects. He is 67. Kings have crossed rooms just to stand near him. He has seen, by now, more than any human being who has ever lived. The inside of the beating heart, the mechanics of flight, the mathematics of light itself. If any person in history earned the right to die satisfied, it is this one. Instead, the account says, he spends some of his final strength on an apology. He is sorry, he tells them. He has offended God and mankind because his work never became what it should have been. The man apologizing is Leonardo da Vinci. Now, that deathbed scene was written down decades later by a Biagio who never met him, and scholars have argued over the exact words ever since. Fair enough. We don't need the legend, because we have his own handwriting. In the margins of his private notebooks, tucked between designs centuries ahead of their time, one line keeps surfacing in his own hand. Tell me if anything was ever done. The mind that saw everything, quietly asking the page whether his life had amounted to anything at all. That is the mystery hanging over everything you're about to see. How does the greatest mind our species has ever produced die believing he was a failure? The trail of that answer runs through his entire life, and it starts with the strangest habit he had. Leonardo wrote everything backwards. Thousands of pages, right to left, every letter reversed, readable only in a mirror. And it turns out his handwriting isn't the only thing about him that only makes sense in reverse. So does his life. So let's start where nobody starts. Long before the machines, before the miracles, before the most famous painting on earth, there was a child the world had already judged and thrown away before he could open his eyes. This is the story of how the greatest mind in history got made, by the exact things that were supposed to break it. It starts with a word, and the word was a sentence. April 15th, 1452. Vinci, a town of olive trees and dust in the hills outside Florence. A young notary named Ser Piero has gotten a local peasant girl pregnant. Her name is Caterina. His name is respectable, which is precisely why he will not be marrying her. The baby comes in someone else's house, and the world it arrives into files it, on sight, under a single word: illegitimate. You have to understand what that word did in the 15th century. It wasn't gossip. It was a verdict, with the consequences written into law. This boy cannot inherit his father's profession. The guilds, the associations that controlled every skilled trade, are closed to him. The universities are closed to him. Latin, the language every book of knowledge in Europe is written in, will never be formally taught to him. Even his name is on loan. Leonardo, son of Piero, from Vinci. Read that again. Da Vinci is not a family name. It's an address. It means the one from that village over there. The most famous surname in human history is, in the original, a shrug. And the boy turns out left-handed, which his century regarded, at kindest, as unlucky, and at worst, as a mark of something darker. Left-handed children were routinely corrected. His was not. His stayed left. Hold on to that hand. It is going to matter more than anything else in this film. Then both parents move on. His father marries a well-off 16-year-old and starts a legitimate family. His mother marries a local man and starts hers. And Leonardo is handed off, raised largely by his grandfather and an easygoing uncle named Francesco, who liked to wander the countryside doing not much of anything, and who may have been the first person ever to simply let the boy look. So before he could walk, The verdict had been read over him, and every institution of his world quietly signed it. You are no one's heir. You will not be educated. You do not count. And here's the thing nobody in Vinci could have known. They had just done this child the strangest favor in the entire history of human thought, because the boy they locked out of every library was left with exactly one book, the one lying open in every direction he turned his eyes. The hills, the rivers, the birds, the light, and with no schoolmaster standing over him to explain what Aristotle had already settled 1,000 years before, he did the one thing no properly educated man of his century would ever have dared to do. He decided to find out for himself. Watch him learn, because how he learned is the whole secret, and it's the first real piece of knowledge in this story. There is a boy lying in the grass beside a stream, and to any adult walking past, he is doing absolutely nothing. He is watching water. Specifically, he is watching the way water braids around a stone, the way it curls, doubles back on itself, spins off little whirlpools that somehow hold their shape while the whole thing keeps moving. He will still be studying that exact problem 50 years later. Water becomes the longest obsession of his life, hundreds of surviving pages, and his drawings of turbulent flow are so accurate that modern engineers who study fluid dynamics look at them with something close to discomfort. A boy in a field, sketching mathematics that wouldn't have a name for 400 years. He stares at trees, too, long enough to notice a thing no one had bothered to write down. Take any tree, at any height on it, add up the thickness of all the branches, and it comes out roughly equal to the thickness of the trunk below them. It's true, and it's useful. It's about how a living system moves water and nutrients, and it's now actually called Leonardo's rule. He found it by lying on his back and looking up. He was a teenager. We can even watch him do it, because one of these early exercises survives. It's dated, the 5th of August, 1473, which makes it the earliest dated work in his entire life. A quick pen drawing of the Arno River Valley. And it is already unlike anything around it. The other landscapes of the age are flat backdrops, decoration. Leonardo's is alive. You can feel the air in it, the far hills fading softer and bluer than the near ones, the water actually moving. A 21-year-old drawing weather. Because he'd noticed something about distance that painters simply hadn't. The farther away a hill is, the more air you're looking through to see it, and all that air scatters the light, so distant things drift toward pale blue and gray, and their edges go soft. Look at any photograph of a mountain range, and you've seen it. Leonardo saw it in the hills of Vinci, worked out roughly why, and turned it into a rule for creating depth on a flat surface. Painters call it atmospheric perspective. It's one of the reasons his backgrounds feel like you could walk into them, and it will show up, one day, behind a certain smile. No tutor assigned any of this. That is the entire point. The world had refused to educate him, so he built his own school, with one teacher, reality, and one rule: look until it answers. And this is where the illegitimate boy quietly did something that reorganized the future. The educated men of his time started from the ancient book and glanced at the world only to confirm what the book already said. Leonardo, locked out of the books, was forced to start from the world, from the evidence, from what his own eyes could actually verify. It's almost impossible to overstate how backwards that looked in the 15th century. It's also almost impossible to overstate how completely it was the right way around. There is a name for what that rejected child was inventing in the grass, though it wouldn't be formally born for another century or more. The empirical method. Evidence before authority. Observation before doctrine. The thing every laboratory on Earth still runs on today. There's a page in his notebooks where you can feel the whole engine of the man in a single moment. He describes coming, on a walk, to the mouth of a great dark cave. And he stops. And two feelings, he writes, rise up in him at once. Fear of the threatening blackness inside, and desire to go in and see whether some marvelous thing might be hidden there. Fear and desire at the mouth of the dark. That was Leonardo his entire life. The fear never won. At 14, the one genuinely useful thing his father ever did for him. Ser Piero took a bundle of the boy's drawings to a friend in Florence, a man named Andrea del Verrocchio, who ran the busiest, best workshop in the city. Verrocchio took one look and took the boy in. And here is where the university Leonardo was never allowed to attend gets smuggled to him through a studio door, because a Renaissance master's workshop was not an art school. It was a laboratory, factory, forge, all at once, and an apprentice absorbed everything. Leonardo ground minerals into pigment, which is chemistry. He prepared the panels and mixed the mediums, the physics of how paint sits and dries and yellows. He learned to cast in bronze, metallurgy, furnaces, molds, the behavior of molten metal. He learned perspective as hard geometry with rulers and vanishing points. He dissected the muscles of the arm to draw a shoulder correctly, anatomy, the obsession that would one day consume him, entering here as a technical chore. He was, in other words, being handed the toolkit of an engineer while everyone thought he was learning to paint. He never stopped being both. To him, they were never two things. There's a story from these years, and I'll flag it as story because it comes from Vasari, our gossipiest source, and it has the shine of a tale that grew in the telling. A peasant near Vinci asks Ser Piero to have a shield painted. Piero passes the job to his teenage son, and Leonardo, the story goes, decides the shield should show something truly terrifying. So he collects lizards, crickets, bats, snakes, and studies them, piece by piece, and assembles from their real parts an invented monster so convincing that when his father first sees it in the dim light, he recoils in genuine fear. True or not, and it may not be, notice what the legend is really about. Not a boy making up a dragon. A boy building a fictional creature entirely out of closely observed real ones. Even the myths about Leonardo are, underneath, about the same thing, looking harder than anyone else in the room. He is learning the craft faster than the men teaching it, and that collision, the unlettered apprentice against the master of Florence, is about to happen on a single wooden panel. Verrocchio is finishing a big commission, a baptism of Christ, and, exactly as masters did, he hands a piece of it to the workshop. Two kneeling angels sit in the corner. Leonardo, still an apprentice, is given the one on the left. Stand in front of that painting today, and you can find his angel from across the room without being told. Verrocchio's figures are skilled, solid, correct. Leonardo's angel is alive. The head turns on the neck with actual weight to it. The hair falls in coils like his beloved moving water. And there is something happening in the face, an inner life, a soul caught in the middle of a thought that exists nowhere else on the entire panel. He'd used what he taught himself in the fields, real light, softened edges, the sense of air. He put science into a corner of someone else's religious painting, and the corner came to life. The famous story says that Verrocchio, when he saw what the boy had done, put down his brush and never painted again. Biographers have polished that line for 5 centuries, and it very likely grew in the retelling, but the plainer facts don't argue with it much. The master did turn more and more to sculpture afterward, and nobody who has ever stood in front of that canvas has needed the ending explained to them. The illegitimate boy from the hills had just outpainted Florence. And listen to exactly how Florence took it. The learned men of the city had a phrase they used for Leonardo for years, and they said it with a smile that wasn't quite a smile. Uomo senza lettere, the man without letters. No Latin, no degree. Brilliant, yes, but unschooled. Whatever this is, it isn't real learning. You still don't count, said the verdict. Quieter now, better dressed. But the same sentence read over the same cradle, and this time we can hear him answer because he wrote it down. You can feel the heat coming off the mirror script. These men, he writes, who can only quote other men, they strut around, puffed up and pompous, decked out not in their own labors, but in the labors of others. They have read Aristotle. I have read the world. They have Latin. I have experience, and experience was the mistress of whoever wrote the books they worship in the first place. He was in his early 20s. He was, by any honest measure, already the finest painter alive. The whole city lay open in front of him, which is the exact moment Florence tried to destroy him. In Florence, there was a box. It hung in a public spot near the seat of government. It had a slot in the top, and it existed for a single purpose: anonymous accusations. Any citizen could scribble a neighbor's name and an alleged crime, unsigned, and drop it through the slot, and the state was then obligated to open a case. It was called the tamburo, the drum. Half the feuds and grudges of the city passed through it, in the dark, with no name attached. On the 9th of April, 1476, a note goes into that drum. It accuses 4 young Florentine men of sodomy. The second name on the list is Leonardo da Vinci. He was 23 years old, and the charge, in that time and place, carried penalties that reached as far as death. He is questioned, released, pending investigation. 2 months later, the accusation is formally renewed, and then it collapses. No witnesses will come forward. There is no evidence. It is an anonymous slander that cannot stand up in daylight. One of the accused had connections to one of the most powerful families in Florence, and the whole matter is quietly, completely dropped. Legally, it was over in a season, but walk through what those months actually were for a young man whose entire childhood had been one long lesson in what Florence thought of him. The sudden silences when he entered the workshop, the friends who were abruptly busy, his father's face, the stares in a city where he had, for one brief season, finally been somebody. The verdict, the one he had spent 23 years outrunning with sheer, undeniable brilliance, was back. And this time, it hadn't come as a sneer. It had come with the machinery of the state behind it. We told you what you are. Something in Leonardo's relationship with Florence dies that spring, and it does not come back to life. In the years after, the accounts and his own habits show the same shift. He grows guarded, private, self-contained. He starts keeping his thoughts somewhere no casual, hostile eye can ever wander through them. On paper he carries on his own belt, in a hand the ordinary world can't read. The competitor telling of this story likes to say he locked himself away for 4 years. There's no good record of that, so we won't pretend there is. But this much is real, and this much is enough. The open, dazzling young star of Florence closes like a hand. And when a door out of the city finally opens, he is ready, more than ready, to walk through it. He is about to reinvent himself completely, and the disguise he chooses will be the most unexpected one imaginable. But before he leaves, stop and look at the pages he's been filling, because the single strangest thing about them is the thing everyone gets wrong. And getting it right is the key to the entire man. Picture him at the bench. He rules the page into blocks, sketches something in a corner, a gear, a skull, a curl of water, and then he writes. Right to left, every single letter flipped. Line after line, page after page, flowing backwards at full speed, without effort or hesitation. for the rest of his life. Why? The romantic answer, the one whole books were built on, the one the sensational versions of this story sell you, is that it was a code, that he was hiding forbidden knowledge from the church, encrypting his heresies to stay off the fire. Say it plainly, that is almost certainly false. Mirror writing is not a code. Any literate person with a hand mirror breaks it in about 10 seconds. Children do it by accident. And Leonardo left his most genuinely dangerous material, the anatomical dissections, fully and openly illustrated. You do not encrypt the caption and then publish the corpse in full view. The real explanation is smaller and stranger, and, once you see it, almost perfectly fitting. He was left-handed. Drag a left hand across wet ink, writing the normal way, left to right, and you smear everything you've just written into a mess. But reverse it, pull the pen right to left, with the letters flipped to match, and for a left hand, it simply glides. Clean, fast, natural. The mirror script wasn't a disguise he engineered. It was just the way his hand wanted to move. The wrong hand, the one his century read as a defect, the one teachers beat out of other children, produced, effortlessly, a script the ordinary world could not read. And now stand back, because this is the shape of the whole story, and it's the last thing you need before everything that came next. Nothing about Leonardo was ever actually backwards. It only looked backwards from where the world happened to be standing. The illegitimacy that locked him out of the universities is the exact reason he learned from reality instead of from a 1,000-year-old book, and reality turned out to be right. The missing Latin the scholars smirked at is the exact freedom that let him question things no lettered man dared question. The left hand his age called a defect wrote a body of work no forger could ever copy. Every single thing the verdict called a flaw was, held up to a mirror, the source of the power. He knew it too, at least about the seeing. He'd built his life on 2 words he treated like a religion. Saper vedere, to know how to see. He had learned to see better than anyone alive, and he was about to point that terrible, patient eye at something new. Not water, not light, not the human face. At war. Around 1482, 30 years old and done with Florence, Leonardo writes a letter, a job application, to the most powerful man in Milan, the Duke, Ludovico Sforza. And here is the thing that stops you cold. The greatest painter alive, in a letter selling himself to a duke, barely mentions painting at all. It's a numbered list, 10 points long, and it is almost entirely a catalog of war. I can build portable bridges to pursue an enemy, he writes, and others to burn theirs. I can drain the water from any moat. I can build cannon and mortars and covered chariots, safe and unassailable. I can destroy any fortress not cut from solid rock. I have methods, he promises the Duke, of infinite variety in the means of offense and defense. Point after point after point of siegecraft and slaughter and machines for the ending of human lives. This, from a man his own contemporaries describe as so gentle he was a vegetarian in an age that found the idea baffling. A man who, the stories say, would buy caged birds in the market for the sole purpose of opening the cage and watching them go. And then, at the very bottom of the list, almost as an afterthought, the last item, point 10, he adds that he can also, by the way, paint and sculpt, as well as any man alive. The greatest artist in history, listing it last. It worked. Milan took him. And so the boy the world threw away is about to walk into the court of power and become something no one who loved him could have predicted, an engineer of death. Over the next 17 years, he will design a weapon that fires 33 shots without reloading in an age of single-shot crossbows. A chariot with spinning blades built, in his own words, to cut men apart like wheat. An armored, covered war machining the world will not build for another 400 years and will end up calling a tank. The gentlest mind in Italy is about to draw the most terrifying weapons ever imagined. Why? What happens to that man inside the machine of power? And is it possible, as some believe, that he was hiding something inside those beautiful, murderous designs all along? The boy the world threw away had learned to see. What he did with that eye, once power came calling, is the strangest chapter of his life.